for NEA members and companies who are on our Supply Chain Northeast programme, so welcome. As everyone knows, electrification is undoubtedly a global mega trend, not just in vehicles, but also across other sectors. But automotive is undoubtedly leading the way, particularly given our legislative challenges set by the UK government in terms of the banning of internal combustion engines in the near future. The Northeast is very well placed to capitalise on this global mega trend. However, the pace of development required means there's never been a better time for either companies to expand their automotive business or for new companies to looking to enter the market. And I hope that across today you will see that both are needed, and also that foreign direct investment is needed as well to help the UK meet its supply chain challenges. So today we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. We're joined by Martin Wood, supply chain specialist from Department for International Trade. And Martin does have an extensive history with the automotive sector. Ryan Morn, chair of EV North and founder of Avid Technologies, a self-proclaimed electrification geek. Rachel Chambers, chief operating officer of Driving the Electric Revolution Centre Northeast. Dr. Colin Heron, MD of Zero Carbon Futures, and we've got three people from the Advanced Propulsion Centre to finish the day off. Philippa Oldham, Stakeholder Engagement Director, John Regnar, Automotive Trend Specialist, and Ruby Akhtar, Business Relationships Lead. So I'm hoping across today's event you'll get a great understanding of the electrification landscape, the support and funding available across the UK ecosystem, and hopefully this will give you some insight into how you can start preparing to help grow and expand your business around electrification within the automotive sector, but also then looking at other opportunities in sectors who have an electrification focus. Before we get into the mains of the event, I'd just like to go through a little bit of housekeeping, if I may. If you could all remain on mute to avoid background interference. After each session, we will take questions, but would ask you to submit your questions via the chat function, and then we'll pick out questions from that chat function at the end of each panel session there. We do have lunch planned at 12:45. It is a long session, but one advantage of webinars is you can go off and make a cup of coffee at any point you wish without interfering on the presentations. So hopefully you'll get a really good understanding of electrification opportunities and where the Northeast is and the UK ecosystem to help you drive forward in this sector. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Martin Wood, supply chain specialist for Department for International Trade. Thank you, Martin.
Many thanks for the kind introduction, Paul. I'm just going to try and share my screen with the presentation. Just give me a second, and perhaps one of the colleagues, perhaps yourself, Paul or Laura, can give me a hint when you see the presentation in the window. Just bear with me 1 second. The advantage of virtual events, of course, is it's slightly less seamless than a real event. Right.
It's coming through now by the looks. There we go.
Right. Is that okay, Paul?
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, good. So thanks for the kind introduction. I think the last time I presented to NEA members was around September 2019. It was on a similar topic, and for sure electrification and really zero emission vehicles remains kind of front and center in terms of strategic priorities going forward. One or two key things have happened though since I last presented and since we've been in the current let's say situation in terms of health. One key item which I wanted to touch on is the government's 10-point plan that was released in November last year, very much putting a green industrial revolution at the heart of the economy as we rebuild through COVID. And I think it's really, really relevant for all of us here today on the automotive side, but also into other sectors that have a really close alignment. So I've detailed the 10 points here, which I'm not going to read all of them. I'll probably pick a few of my favourites, but certainly the box in the centre is all about zero emission vehicles. Paul's already referenced the ending of sale of petrol and diesel engine only variant vehicles in 2030, and that's been pulled forward from 2040. And the UK is deliberately trying to take a very strong strategic leadership position. There is this kind of transition period to 2035 for certain hybrids. But again, as I said, it's a very clear leadership position, and it's one of the most progressive policies globally and certainly in Europe. To support that, we have the rollout of the Automotive Transformation Fund that I'll touch further on to help companies de-risk as they supply into these vehicles. And we have a release of further funding to support the more extensive rollout of the EV charging infrastructure, because there's still quite a lot of work to do. But this is very much a joined up strategy. So you see item 1, advancing offshore wind, and of course there's a lot of offshore wind connection, which I'll come on to, in the northeast. We're talking about low carbon hydrogen, so green hydrogen. We're talking about greener buildings. It's a common theme, and it's not an initiative, it's a long-term strategy to really put the UK at the forefront of thinking and implementation around the green agenda. And everyone will have seen the pull forward of net zero, which was only last week, I think Thursday. So a good, clear baseline for what we're trying to achieve in automotive transformation. And I've already touched on the ways that road transport is looking to be decarbonised, or how it should be decarbonised. And I wanted to touch on 2 of the key, let's say, government interventions that are there to help de-risk this transformation. The Faraday Battery Challenge, and more recently, the Driving the Electric Revolution Challenge. And of course, I'm really pleased that Rachel is here to talk about the detail of that challenge. I'll just be providing a few highlights. So I'm going to move on to touch now on the Faraday Battery Challenge, which you may not know so much about, but it's government intervention. So it's government money going into putting the UK at the forefront of battery development and to remain competitive into the long term. And the funding is you can see on the egg, it's divided into 3 areas. And if you think about this in terms of technology readiness level, it's really trying to span as much as the TRL or even MRL scale as possible. So we're looking at fundamental research, looking at through the Faraday Institution to see how the materials and the innovation for the future can power batteries into the longer term, because of course batteries will have to be more efficient, they'll have to be less costly, they'll have, not most importantly, but as importantly, which many people forget, they have to be easily to recycle and repurpose. So this kind of innovation strand is really, really important, and this research and these research programs will be vital if we are to stay at the forefront of battery development into the long term. Beyond the kind of fundamental research into, if you like, collaborative R&D, CR&D, which UKRI Innovate traditionally supports, there's over 64 projects now funded by UK Gov, which are really excellent collaborative projects between academic institutions, between SMEs, between industry leading companies in the battery space or the battery materials space or the chemical space. Again, we're seeing definite interest from overseas investors in this collaborative R&D kind of framework, which really does help us move the conversation on in terms of future investment. So I think that's really positive. Beyond that, and maybe moving slightly up the MRL scale, we've got the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre. So that's over £125 million of government funding. It's based in Coventry, but look, Coventry's not so far away. And I think I would like to urge local companies in the Northeast to really make sure that they utilise that facility and that they utilise that government spending, that taxpayer spending to the benefit of their businesses in the Northeast of the UK. That facility is very much pitched at the ton scale. So it's to try and take it out of the lab and to de-risk as you go into the kilogram scale, the kiloton scale, or the gigafactory scale. And I'll just talk a little bit more now about the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre. Based at pretty close to Coventry Airport, it's a good location. It's close to Warwick Manufacturing Group, and again, we're a relatively small country, a small island, and again, I would urge local businesses in the Northeast, just as they use the excellent academic resources close at hand in the region, to also look beyond, to really maximise their potential from the resources that we have available nationally as well. And very much the idea behind UK BIC is to create this open access facility that companies can go to trial new materials, new processes, new formats of cell, whether it's cylindrical or pouch, or perhaps in the future prismatic, so that they can de-risk that investment and not interrupt production lines, or even use UK BIC as a potential scale-up facility as they then look to install some full-scale production in the UK, and in this case, hopefully the Northeast. Really important to say that the intellectual property is protected for companies that use the facility. UK Gov is not interested in collecting intellectual property. And it's really certainly the only one of its type in Europe, and possibly even globally. And interesting, at least to me, is even the Fraunhofer in Germany is at the minute rushing to catch up with where we are. So I think it's a really, really good facility that we should encourage everyone in the UK to access. As I just wanted to say, really show and indicate that this isn't, that the UK BIC isn't just a PowerPoint imagination. It's a real facility, and what's great is local companies in the Northeast have taken part in the installation of equipment, and certainly the refrigeration units and clean rooms by and large come from an excellent company in your region. So I think it's important to say that it's not just about the West Midlands. And what you'll see even from the slides is you'll see that many of the processes are now up and running. In fact, most of the processes are commissioned. Certainly, if I'm not mistaken, on the pouch side and following up on the cylindrical side. And we have the opportunity to make electrode material, to configure the cells, to process the cells. So cathode, anode, filling of electrolyte, very much a mini facility, rated up to about 1 gigawatt hour in terms of capacity. And as I've said, we're seeing a lot of interest from overseas investors and, of course, UK companies to use this to kind of help de-risk their progress and to help them prepare for future investment. So I'm going to move off UK BIC, and Rachel, I do promise just to touch on driving the electric revolution, but I think you know, the EV world isn't all batteries, batteries, batteries. I mean, batteries are really important because they're a very decisive cost element of an EV going forward, at least until the battery cost structure comes down. But of course, very important to the drivability of vehicles, to the delivery of performance, and just as important are the elements that sit within driving the electric revolution, or really my old background of PEMD, power electronics, e-machines and drives. And I'll come on to some indicators of how well suited the Northeast is to this transition towards zero emission vehicles and largely EV. Because the Northeast of any region in the UK, and in fact of any region really in Europe, shouldn't be afraid of the change because of the assets that are already existing in the Northeast and the excellent companies that are already playing in this space. But DER, I think, is vitally important. I think one thing that I'm sure Rachel will stress is that anything that's electrified going forward, or that may generate electricity from a rotating motion, will of course need an electric motor and potentially then an inverter drive or some sort of control electronics. So this is a cross-sectoral play. The Faraday challenge is very much automotive focused with a look out into other sectors, and I'm sure that will expand, you know, for example, kind of stationary storage. But DER is very much at start deliberately meant to be cross-sectoral. Of course, auto will play a key part, but there's other things, for example, in the Northeast, like for thinking of wind turbine kind of generated energy, where there are other opportunities, and I'm sure Rachel will touch on that later. So driving electric revolution is trying to empower those supply chains and those companies for the future, to provide funding for sure, to provide that very important networking collaboration, the industrialization centers, and perhaps quite uniquely, but really, really importantly, to support the talent for the future. And I know, you know, a number of the presenters today are very much thinking of Philippa and Colin, for example, are very much focused on talent growth around this ecosystem, and I'm sure they've got other points to make on that. But there's a really sizable investment in the upskilling and reskilling and training, and to evolve the workforce for the future. And please don't forget, the UK has some of Europe's top drives and machines institutes here already. So in terms of our research groups, our university sector, and you have one of the very best already in the Northeast in Newcastle University. I mean, my base is Sheffield, so we have another one here at Sheffield University, which again is not so far away. So there's some really, I think, really exciting opportunities to build from that great academic base, and I'll touch on skills a little bit more later. Apologies, the wrong way. So I just wanted to give a feel for where the numbers sit in terms of the 80 million, but I'm going to hold off that and leave to Rachel. I just wanted to stress one, perhaps 2 points here. Firstly, the transition to EV is a really great opportunity for us to make a step change in the UK content of UK built vehicles, because this is a once in a generation change. And if we can anchor the supply chains for the future in batteries, in e-machines, in drives, in control electronics, in fuel cells, then we can see more value created in the UK and put into. We were fairly convinced that we absolutely needed some government support to de-risk these huge investments. And you know, it's really pleasing that we've had 1 billion of commitment towards the electrification agenda for the supply chains for vehicles, and this is for supply chains, not for vehicles. So it's very well defined. For sure, we're hunting for gigafactories for the battery cell production for the future, but also we recognise that in order for Nissan or others to be competitive into the long term, then they'll need to buy battery cells in the UK. They'll need to have battery cell supply chains in the UK, and those other components that I've just been talking about in the DER section. And for sure, we see this as vitally important to protect jobs across the whole of the UK. Next slide, please, Laura. So the Automotive Transformation Fund is delivered through our partners at APC on behalf of the Department for Business, yeah, there's many colleagues from APC talking later today. Please do engage with them. Many of the colleagues in APC are ex-industry people, ex-business people, worked in various different business-facing kind of companies and organisations, so they're really used to those conversations and can really help signpost you through. And of course, their mantra is really to help. You know, I've talked about some of the technologies which ATF is defined to support, and it's important that we support all of them, and not just the kind of gigafactory fashionable word, let's say, although it's really, really important. There's a number of other important topics there as well. And the idea of ATF is to de-risk that capital investment, so factory, land, buildings and setup. Again, Philippa will probably touch on later today, expressions of interest are open for companies that want to access the ATF. We have applications in train, so please don't miss out, because, you know, as always, money is finite. And of course, there's also been 2 rounds of feasibility studies, and this is something to have a think about for companies. There's been 40 odd companies that have accessed 50% funding up to 1 million or 1.5 million. In order for those companies to get their plans in the right place to make a bid into full ATF for investment support, and that's been really well appreciated. And I'm pleased to say that there's a number of applications that have come from companies in the Northeast into the ATF, into the EOIs and the feasibility studies. Thank you, Laura. Next slide, please. So, I mean, I considered what the starting points are for this automotive transformation in the Northeast, because you know, it's vitally important to know what you've got and then how you can build on it to get to where you want to get to, which is OEMs producing zero emission vehicles in your region, supplied largely from your region, and then exported all around the world. So for sure, the Northeast has an extremely strong engineering and manufacturing heritage, and it's an established centre of the UK auto industry, probably, you know, one of the 2 key centres, I would say. And of course, you're very fortunate that there are OEMs situated directly in the region, whether it's Nissan or whether Komatsu or, you know, Caterpillar or others in the various kind of subsectors of vehicle and off-highway production. So that's a real benefit. And of course, you have a number of world-class tier 1s, diverse network of tier 2, 3, 4 advanced manufacturing businesses. So great, let's say, fundamentals. And again, I go back to the beginning, because the Northeast has a reputation in the UK for engineering and manufacturing, and frankly, hard work. I think as important as those are some other points I wanted to draw on it. You know, the first gigafactory in Europe is in the Northeast, co-located at Nissan's plant in Sunderland, run by Envision ASC. 2 gigawatt hours, you know, really a trailblazing investment made 10 years ago. And of course, to build on that, Britishvolt has chosen Blythe for their first battery cell investment, which will be a scale effect bigger, you know, kind of around the 20 to 30 gigawatt hour, again, which is terrifically exciting for the region. There's already kind of key suppliers in the region that businesses, SMEs can do business with on the subject of electrification, whether it's motors or inverters or whatever it might be. And I've already touched on the SMEs that we all know of in the region. You know, a couple of university spin-outs, some industry leading innovation, particularly around the Emission side, and also around the control electronics side. A couple of other things that might be slightly less obvious. Wilton is close on hand on Teesside. I think it's the second biggest chemical park in Europe. It's a key asset, and it's not so far away from, you know, from, let's say, Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough. That spread is not so far. And the provision of renewable electricity is going to be decisive on companies that produce EV components into the midterm. So there's some great access to offshore wind generated electricity. And I think that's a really important point to remember. Next slide, please, Laura. So I'm just going to try and bring out a few opportunities to get people thinking. And I mean, a number of you will probably have seen these these pies that I've done before when I've presented, but it's to remind the same message, really. So I'm going to start off with the automotive, let's say, core of batteries and EDUs. Although actually there's higher value in the more chemical side, I think this is a great place to start. Batteries and motors and drives, there's many subcomponents that are, let's call them traditional components, whether they're stamped or cast parts or plastics. You know, there's businesses that make these parts for other sectors, other products, other types of solutions that are just as valid for electric vehicles and these components. So, you know, batteries need plastic frameworks to hold the pouches. They need or cylinders. They need pressed battery covers. They may need extruded battery enclosures or cast corners where material properties are important. They need wire harnesses. They need control electronics. So there's a whole load of things that's required, and the cooling system of a battery, whilst of course it works, what it's trying to deliver is quite different than cooling an engine. You know, some of the thermal management is at least in the same ballpark in terms of consideration. So I think there's some things for companies to think about and you know, to try to align to get those opportunities for the future. Next slide, please, Laura. I wanted to talk then about the chemical opportunity, which is not so obvious and clearly is not so automotive. But 60% of a cell comes from what we would probably consider to be chemical processes. And of course, you know, some of the legacy assets that are sat on Wilton and that have been developed excellently by Semcor give the region of the NEAA really a great start point and a kind of almost an unfair advantage, other than of course it's completely fair. So it's how do we exploit that? And I reflected, you know, obviously DIT are leading the battery cell manufacturing investment programs from overseas investors. And beyond that, we're also talking with companies that make cathode, make anode material, electrolyte separators, precursor materials, foil materials. And largely that comes from the chemical sector, and some of the names actually you see, the company names, they're actually already based in the Northeast, or if I can stretch the Northeast pool without offending everyone on the call, Phillips 66 is in the southern Northeast, as I called it on the Humber. But there we go. It's not so far away. So, you know, I think there's some great opportunities that we should be able to build on. Next slide, please, Laura. So I'm going to try and keep a handle on time, and I don't know whether there's a chance for questions, Paul, but I'm happy to take any if there is. So I just thought, you know, I'd just remind people, Wilton, the Tees Valley Integrated Complex. The electrolyte for all Nissan Leaf vehicles is produced in the region. Cathode active material development's already done in the region, including in Gateshead. And there's a lot of world-class chemical companies already based on the Tees Valley complex. And you know, a lot of the materials they produce, the feedstock they produce, is either directly relevant as a feedstock for battery production, or by, let's say, taking a few development or investment steps, they can utilize that plant and equipment to make something that is perhaps a derivative. So I think the Northeast is really well set. Next slide, please, Laura. So I think it's also worth business reflecting on who's there, who is there to help, and obviously the NEAA are absolutely definitely there to help, and with the EV North group that Paul kindly keeps me updated on, you've got a great cluster there, and this kind of collaboration is actually what makes the UK different, but also definitely makes the region in the Northeast different. Because we talk to investors a lot, and they're really surprised with how tight knit we are in the UK, how we talk to each other, and how we try and support companies together. So what is there in the region? I mean, most people on the call will know these things better than I. I've already confessed that I'm not situated in the Northeast, but I'm at least in the North. But you know, these are some of the ones that I know of or have contacts into, and certainly when we look at CPI, you know, there's some real world-class work going on within the CPI in various different schemes, coming from materials, but also into electronics. And I could imagine, I'm going to combine two things there. Printed, flexible electronics could be really quite important for the long term, and is already important now, actually. Materials processing, if we think about the materials of the future, to get costs down, to get more efficient, support from institutes like that is going to be really decisive. I've thrown offshore wind in as a curveball, just to remind people that there is this adjacency. And I guess other than you know, the DER hub in the north, Newcastle University's really world-class machines and drives research group, you're also really well served with academia in the Northeast. And again, I'm probably going to risk offending different people on the call by not mentioning every institute or getting the local politics wrong. But I mean, my wife went to Sunderland University, so I always have one eye going in that direction. And I noticed that, you know, that they're really forward leaning in terms of things like sandwich courses for degrees to give people that industrial experience, and you know, degree apprenticeships coming from Tees Valley, from Teesside University, Newcastle University I've already mentioned. You know, there's a plethora of colleges, there's UTCs, there's institutes, some of which I've visited. You know, so that topic of future skills, that's really a place that the Northeast can really play with strength, because that does attract investors. When we talk to investors, they want to know, where am I going to get my workforce from? And I think the Northeast has got that in a really good place. Next slide, please. So what I've tried to highlight is really take us through what the government policy is, what the start points and support are for businesses that want to invest, where some of the opportunities are coming from in terms of future products, future orders, and also then to give a hint of where I think some support could come from. I mean, to be quite frank, Paul and the team are far better to signpost to local support than I am, and certainly myself and Rachel and Philippa and the rest of the team can probably help with the wider UK picture, because, you know, please remember, there are important support organisations all around the UK that I would really encourage NEAA members to utilise as well. For sure, you know, I reflect as we've gone through COVID, which is obviously a terrible situation. I hesitate to use the word a positive to come out of it because it seems hugely insensitive. But for sure, electrification is moving faster, not slower, as a result of the, let's say, realignment of the world, and that is at least a good thing. It's clear, as we've seen the maps of pollution over cities during the first lockdown. It's clear as we've seen the investment plans of companies like VW, the realignments of companies like Jaguar Land Rover, and the you know, the definite forward steps taken by companies like Nissan. That electrification is not slowing; it's not going away. For sure, companies are having to take some very important and difficult choices because, you know, finances are damaged and they have to get their bets right. One thing for sure is the UK remains determined to be a go-to location for these future investments, and I'm really pleased to say in 2021 that we're extremely busy with inquiries from overseas investors that see the UK as a place to invest. And I reflect that the certainty that the TCA with the EU that's given us is at least a help. You know, I certainly urge companies in the Northeast to exploit these opportunities, and apologies for the typo. And please do contact APC, get in contact with Rachel at DER, make all our lives difficult to help you as companies, to help you invest and help you generate and protect employment, because that's what we're here to do. Thanks very much. And at least on the last slide, you can see that it's a full national picture that we give out from that typo. And as I said, please utilise those national assets as well as the excellent assets you have locally. That's broadly what I had, Paul. If you want to just go to the last slide, Laura, I think my email address might be on it. If I've, oh no, it isn't. Okay. Look, Paul, and Laura and Stuart and Rohan have all got contact to me. If anyone wants to contact me, then that's great. You know, just to be mindful, as we all, I've got finite bandwidth, but I certainly try and help wherever I can. I wondered if there was any questions, Paul and Laura.
From just one from me, Martin.